Welcome back to Vaccine Choice Canada.
This is the most important and probably the most difficult decision that they'll be asked to make.
It's a 200-year, multi-generational myth.
When I was in medical school, I learned nothing about what was in vaccines.
We want responsiveness from the medical establishment and from the government.
This is something that permanently alters your child's immune response.
We advocate for informed consent and voluntary vaccination decisions.
What are we afraid of?
This information is not intended as legal, health, or nutritional advice. It is provided for informational purposes only. Vaccine Choice Canada does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements, views, and opinions presented by its guests.
Warm welcome to all of our friends at Vaccine Choice Canada and to the members of Canada Health Alliance with whom we collaborate on these conversations. A special welcome to those joining us for the first time. My name is Ted Kuntz and I'm the president of Vaccine Choice Canada. My co-host again this evening is Dr. Stephen Malthouse. Dr. Malthouse practiced family medicine in Canada for 45 years, integrating the best of conventional and complementary therapies with a special interest in homeopathic medicine. Dr. Malthouse is the founding president of Canadian Integrative Medicine Association, past president of Canada Health Alliance, and a longtime supporter of Vaccine Choice Canada. His wisdom and experience as a frontline physician are valued in these conversations. This evening's conversation is part of our Raising Healthy Children series. This evening is the 8th in a series of conversations Dr. Malthouse and I are hosting where we examine the claims of the vaccine industry. This evening's conversation is with Dr. Sherri Tenpenny. We will focus on one of the most widely used vaccines in the world, administered 6 times between 2 months and 18 years of age, the diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus vaccines. Our goal with these conversations is to assist parents and adults to make an informed decision based upon quality scientific evidence. Stephen, would you introduce Dr. Sherri Tenpenny for us, please?
Yes, it'd be my pleasure. I really can't imagine there's anyone on this call who doesn't already know and I think admire Dr. Tenpenny. She's been one of the most outspoken advocates for making choices about vaccination. And for those who may come to this interview as a result of beginning to question vaccination themselves, Dr. Sherri Tenpenny is an osteopathic medical doctor with expertise in both emergency and integrated medicine. She's one of the first medical doctors to speak publicly about the dangers of vaccines and has dedicated the last 20 years plus to researching, documenting, and educating the public. Dr. Tenpenny's writing courses and her online and in-person speaking engagements inspire and empower us to make informed decisions about our healthcare, including vaccination. Dr. Tenpenny is the author of quite a few books, including Foul Bird Flu, It's Not What You Think, Saying No to Vaccines, a resource guide for all ages, Challenging the Vaccination Dogma, the MMR Vaccine, The Loss of Future Generations Over an Unrealistic Fear of the Measles, 40 Mechanisms of Injury, and more. Dr. Tenpenny is also the author of a newly released book entitled Zero Accountability in a Failed System, How Big Pharma Weaponizes Vaccines, Public Health, and the Law. So it's my honor and pleasure to welcome you, Dr. Tenpenny.
Thank you, Dr. Malthouse. That's great. Thank you so much for that introduction. And I will tell you, I've been doing this 25 years as of last month.
Wow.
So September marked my 25-year anniversary. Is that the correct word?
Congratulations
for doing this.
Your journey down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, sometimes you pick things and sometimes things pick you. Is kind of how it works. So I put together, if you want me to do this, or if you just want open forum question and answer either way, but I have a pretty extensive PowerPoint presentation that I can do on the share file about pertussis, because pertussis and it covers all ages. It covers from giving the DTaP to pregnant women, to giving it at 2, 4, and 6 months, and 5 years. And then it also talks about the Boostrix and the Adacel vaccine that they have for teenagers. And it also talks about the whole myth of elderly people needing to get a pertussis vaccine to see their babies. So it's
Great.
A little long, but it's very thorough. If you want me to go through it, I can do that tonight.
Sure.
Well, I'd be interested in that. And I
Me
also
too.
want to make sure we talk about your new book. But I'm curious about, you said this is your 25th anniversary. Could you just share a little bit about how this topic picked you 25 years ago?
Well, I grew up in a chiropractic family that my grandfather, my father, three uncles, and two cousins were chiropractors. And I had my first chiropractic adjustment when I was about 2 months old. No, that's not right. When I was about 2 weeks old. And so that's how I decided I wanted to be an osteopath, because I wanted to have that tool in my toolbox, because it was sort of multi-generational in my family. And when I graduated from medical school, there were only 3 vaccines on the schedule. So we got no training about that. It was MMR, DPT, and polio. And so there was nothing much to say, no training other than these are the 3 vaccines. They're safe and effective. You got to give them. And then all the years I was in the ER, I never bothered to look up anything about vaccines or the package insert or tetanus shots or anything, even though I gave tetanus shots away like they were some special kind of candy, because of course, tetanus is this absolutely deadly disease, right? Which it's not. And so set that light a little bit better. I think I don't look like I'm in the shadow.
Good.
And I stepped out of the ER and started an integrative practice here in Cleveland in 1996, and was just doing my thing in my office practice. And in September of 2000, I got a flyer in the mail to the National Vaccine Information Center meeting, and somehow it just wouldn't leave my kitchen counter. Every time I tried to throw it away, it magically ended up back on the countertop. And I had noticed that a lot of parents who bring in very young children were like clutching their baby to their chest and kind of backing away from me saying, "What's your position on vaccines?" I'm like, I don't know. I don't know that I have a position. I had measles, mumps, rubella, chickenpox, pertussis twice when I was a kid. And, I don't know. And I don't know. And so when I couldn't get that flyer to go in the trash, I decided that there was somebody there I really needed to meet, that there was some reason that I was being drawn to that conference. I even went so far as to call them and to ask them when the next conference was, because going down there in September was not a real convenient time for me to go to DC. They said, "Well, we're just a small nonprofit. We may not ever have another conference." I'm like, okay, so I'll go. Not knowing anything about what I was going going to see. And I got there was about 700 people at that meeting. Many teenagers in diapers and wheelchairs and, and push around stroller things. And I spent 3.5 days listening to doctors and lawyers and parents of vaccine injured children, parents of unvaccinated children, bench science researchers talk about all these problems with vaccines. And to this day, that was 25 years ago, to this day, I still have those notes in my cupboard that I just wrote voraciously, writing down everything that they possibly said. And I came home after that going, how did I miss this? I've been in medicine for 20 years 15 years at that point. I'd had my own clinic for 4 years. I thought, well, where should I start looking this up? I should probably look into this. Well, and then I thought, well, if I was a lawyer, brand new lawyer, and looking up a topic, I'd probably start with Supreme Court cases or state Supreme Court cases. So I guess I'll go to the highest law of the land. I guess I'll go to the CDC and see what the CDC has to say about this. So this was in September of 2000. I pulled up the 1998 version of the General Recommendations of Vaccination, because they used to do those every 2 years. They do them about every 3 years now. And I printed it out and I read this 40-page paper that was poorly written, bad grammar. Every reference was the CDC. So that would be like Sherri Tenpenny writing an article and publishing it and having every reference be Sherri Tenpenny, right, on the paper. It's like the circular logic. And I thought, this can't be it. And I looked it up, and at that point in time, the vaccine industry was about an $8 billion industry. I said, this can't be it. There's got to be more to it than that. And so that's where it kind of began from. I just picked a vaccine. I picked polio first, because everybody in their quest starts with, well, what about smallpox? What about polio? Because we think that cured everything, right? So I started polio, and I spent a lot of time on the World Health Organization website looking at their documents in literally their size 2 font, reading their references about following vaccine-induced paralytic polio, their VAP, and how it went to a certain point and then they stopped following it anymore. I subsequently found out they don't follow it anymore because there are more children that get paralysis from the vaccine than got from wild type polio. So they didn't want anybody to know that. So they just stopped following it. And the vaccine, the polio site that really is the most about eradicating polio does the same thing. They do a very poor job of tracking the vaccine-induced paralytic polio. They really do. So, one thing led to another, and 25 years later, here I am. 50,000 hours or more than 50,000 hours of research. Because what I used to do in the office, I'd work in the office from like 9 to 5. I'd come home, I'd fix a stir fry, and I'd run upstairs. At the time, my office was upstairs. And it would just start peeling through all of these journals and reading until 3 o'clock in the morning every night. And I learned that I had to be in bed before 3 o'clock or the next day I felt like trash. If I went to bed at 3:05, I felt terrible. If I went to bed at 2:50, I felt fine. I don't know. I'm sure that's Chinese medicine somehow that has to do with my meridians.
It may be the power of placebo. It's hard to know, isn't it?
Well, no, it's really true. It's honestly the truth. And I really think it has something to do with my meridians and acupuncture. I really do. So
Sherri, was it Andrew Wakefield at that 2020 conference?
He was.
That was when he spoke, because I was at that conference,
Yeah. Well,
So we have a connection, and I was born in Cleveland.
Oh, wow. How about that? So
maybe we had a sister that went astray. Maybe that could be.
Oh, I don't think so. I'm an only kid, so I don't think so. So I just peeled through each one, and I would take 2 weeks of work off from work at a time. And I found a really cool little hotel right on the beach in San Diego. It was actually in Encinitas, North County, San Diego. And I would go out there for 2 weeks at a time. And 18 hours a day, I would do research. I would go to the grocery store and I'd go to my little wine store and I'd get a couple bottles of wine. I'd get all my groceries and I wouldn't leave that little condo at all, except once a day. I would go down on the beach at low tide and go for a walk on the beach. And I did that for months. I would go out there 2 weeks at a time, about every 3 months.
So what captured you so intensely? What compelled you to make that kind of a commitment to this subject?
Well, I spent the first 3 years trying to figure out, why are we doing this?
Mhm.
I mean, I had measles, mumps, rubella, chickenpox, and pertussis, and I'm healthier because of it. Why are we doing this? So I spent a lot of time researching that, like trying to figure out, okay, sooner or later, I'm going to find the seminal paper that says that this is safe, effective, totally trusted, totally tested, and this is why we have to vaccinate the world with it. Well, after 3 years and after 25 years, there's still no such thing.
Right.
And after 3 years, I was really angry. I was really mad at the pharmaceutical industry. I was really mad at doctors for not knowing any of this stuff. And I was really mad at parents that didn't bother to say what's coming through that needle. And I've spent all these years just trying to get people to ask that question.
Yeah.
What are the ingredients in that shot? And does my child really need that now at 2 months of age? I mean,
Maybe this is a good point to jump into your presentation, because I think it will undoubtedly look at what's in the shot for pertussis. And it sounds like it's going to rove a little bit into diphtheria and tetanus as well.
no, this presentation really doesn't.
Oh,
But
okay.
there's 4 cases of diphtheria per year reported in the US. There's worldwide, it's like less than a couple hundred. I don't know why we give kids, all of these shots, because even some of the other shots have diphtheria toxin as a carrier, right? And so in tetanus, you can still have 4 tetanus. You can get as many as 4 tetanus shots and still contract tetanus. And that was when I looked at the CDC data on that. That's when I knew that the whole thing was a huge scam, because, and it was one of the last ones that I investigated. I guess it's because I didn't really want to know, because I used to give tetanus shots all the time, And when I really looked and said, there's so few cases of reported tetanus, that they give credit to all of this to everybody being vaccinated, but really it's just the mere fact that there's just not that much tetanus. And it's only under very specialized circumstances, and that you can treat it with an antibiotic. You can treat it with homeopathics, and that you can have more than 4 tetanus shots and still get tetanus. So what good is a tetanus shot if you can still get it anyways? And that was the final, probably stake in the heart of the vaccine industry, as far as I was concerned.
I think it's the fear that, people think tetanus is going to kill you. It's like a death sentence. And then that's, I think, what drives people to give tetanus shots. And as doctors, I know that we would give them at the time for an insignificant cut. And we probably, based on, what that was doing to maybe, how would you say, reduce the person's ability to fight back, that it might have interfered with their healing of the laceration or whatever we were treating. So,
well, the thing is that, when I was started investigating tetanus and I was reading all the tetanus literature, so to speak, and I've got quite a few articles that show, you can have a very high tetanus antibody titer and still get tetanus anyways. So I was reading all these case reports about tetanus, and it was saying this happened, blah, blah, blah. They were very sick, stormy course, and fully recovered. And fully recovered. And this all happened. They were sick and fully recovered. And my brain was going, wait a minute, this is uniformly fatal. If you get tetanus, you die. Mm-hmm. And there was case report after case after case after case after case that people got full-blown tetanus and they fully recovered. Mm-hmm. The biggest one was a case report of over 50 people that all of them returned to work except for 3 people, and they didn't return to work because of PTSD of being sick. It wasn't because of the tetanus. Mm-hmm. It was that they'd had a rather stormy course with the infection, and they were still recovering from that. But all the rest of them recovered and went back to work. Nobody died in that case series.
Dr. Tenpenny, my journey was a bit like yours, where I kept thinking I'm missing something. And so I was reading and reading and reading for years. And I remember finally contacting Etta West, who was the founder of Vaccine Choice Canada. I said, Etta, I think none of these things work. Have I gone too far over the edge? And she said, you finally figured it out.
It's a 200-year multi-generational myth that people have propagated. I mean, think about just polio. Okay, polio, the height of the polio epidemic was, they released the polio vaccine in 1954. So the height, the most cases, when I say the height of it, the most cases reported was somewhere like 53 to about 56 in that range when they released the polio vaccine. And here we are now, 2 generations later. When you ask a young parent, why this, polio has not been present in the Western Hemisphere since 1991. The last case of wild polio was in the Western Hemisphere in Peru in 1991. And it was certified by the World Health Organization, the entire Western Hemisphere, Canada, the US, Central America, South America, Mediterranean, Hawaii, completely polio-free since 1994. Why are we still giving children 4 polio vaccines? We're imported polio. Like there's 18 cases of imported polio in a 20-year period of time. So we're vaccinating against the boogeyman like it doesn't exist. But yet, when you're to a large group of people, when I say polio, what's the first thing that pops into your head?
Iron lungs,
paralysis, kids with braces, right? Mm-hmm. 60 years later, people are still saying that. How well did the March of Dimes do their job?
Fabulous.
What did they do?
Great.
Depends how you look at it. They didn't eradicate it, which was what they were telling people to do, but they certainly propagated a lot of the myths around it, which are present even today.
65 years later, they still are, we've got to vaccinate against polio because it's not completely eradicated yet. Somebody might come here. It was like when they found, one strain of perceived polio virus in the middle of Gaza. And they
Right.
decided they in the UNICEF and the World Health Organization swooped in and did 500,000 doses of oral polio vaccine 3 times to those kids
Wow.
in Gaza. I said, those kids in Gaza do not need a polio vaccine. They need water, food,
Food.
shelter, safety. They need to be clean and safe. And oh no, we're not going to do anything with that. But we're going to keep them from getting polio. And where do you think that strain of polio came from? The oral polio vaccine upstream from the sewage plant. It's the whole industry is just awful.
All right, why don't we wade into pertussis? I'm curious about what you've got
Yeah,
there.
because I'm going to be running late on this now. So, but this is good. Okay, so let me share my screen here. Where is it? So we're going to talk about pertussis vaccines and evaluating the science. This is kind of a long but very thorough information. I think that by the time we're done with this, you really won't have any more questions about pertussis. So what is pertussis? Well, basically it is a severe cough. It's a severe cough disease that's characterized by extremely harsh cough, typically worse at night and not associated with a fever, which is the big distinguishing difference between this and other bacterial types of infections. There's no fever with it, and it's typically worse at night. It's true. That's also true in adults. If adults have had a cough for more than 30 days, worse at night with no fever, the one part of the differential diagnosis should be pertussis, and it never is. Doctors never think about that because they've had a pertussis vaccine, so therefore they can't get pertussis. It's between the big coughs that people may not even be sick. They may go to work. They may have a regular everything. The severity of the illness is inversely related to age, means that the only time that pertussis is really severe and a worrisome condition is in babies less than 3 months of age, and in the elderly that have compounding conditions where they may not be able to tolerate the really harsh cough. And pertussis isn't deadly. In fact, it's mostly an annoying, uneventful, and most people recover uneventfully. Most pertussis-related deaths are due to complicated secondary bacterial pneumonias. And so when kids were younger, let's say back in the 40s, when a lot of kids were getting more pertussis and adults were getting pertussis, they died primarily due to the complications of a separate bacterial pneumonia, not because of pertussis. Now, Bordetella was first isolated in 1906, and it's an obligate human pathogen, means it only infects humans. It doesn't infect other species like, say, a flu virus does. There are multiple Bordetella species, but the 2 main ones that infect humans are Bordetella pertussis and Bordetella praepertussis. And these days, if kids actually have this harsh, persistent cough, it's more likely parapertussis because the vaccine doesn't do anything for that. The pathogenicity caused by the proteins classified as adhesins and toxins. So what is an adhesin? The virulence factor that allows the pertussis to bind to the upper respiratory tract. There are multiple different protein antigens that are on the surface of the pertussis bacteria that can cause things that cause this cough. The FHA is a bacterial. Looks like a little hair. Looks like a little hair that causes it to stick to the inside of the trachea. The same with the fimbriae. And then there's something called protactin that once the pertussis bacteria is buried into the trachea, it releases protactin, which is like an irritant. And the irritant in that with the tracheal colonization factor is what makes you cough. And so in little babies, the reason why it's so serious, and I may be getting ahead of myself here, but the reason that it's serious in children less than 3 months of age is because their trachea is so small. It's smaller than my little finger, and my little finger is pretty little. And it's because they don't have the oomph to cough. And the cough can wear them out completely. And when there's a little bit of a spasm that happens in their throat. So when they cough, and then there's the trachea is a spasm. Then when they breathe back in, that's what causes the whoop, and that's why they call it whooping cough. Now, the toxins that are also released are the pertussis toxin that's not secreted by pertussis, and that's one of the reasons why, excuse me, that the pertussis vaccine doesn't really protect against parapertussis. These are other types of things that cause that whooping cough sound. These toxins interfere with the body's ability to see or to identify the bacteria, because what the toxins do is it blocks your white blood cells from coming in and gobbling up the bacteria and getting rid of it. And so the bacteria, so it can't really relieve the body from that bacteria. And now it's really interesting, even though these specifics are known about each one of the different protein antigens that are inside of the Bordetella pertussis, the illness is still not completely understood. Since we've identified it, remember, back in 1906, and they still don't know. And I'm not even sure they're even investigating it now, because they've got a vaccine. They don't need to investigate it anymore. It's sort of like aluminum. They've been using aluminum since the 1930s. And any paper that you read now that's published 2023 or 24, 25 about aluminum, it starts out by saying we've used aluminum as an adjuvant for over 100 years. It really works well, but we don't know how. We don't know why it works. We just know it works. So they're injecting this known toxin into children that where if you get every dose of every vaccine, by the time you are 18 years of age, you will have almost 12,000 micrograms of aluminum injected in you, but they don't know why and they don't know how it works. So the World Health Organization says that pertussis is endemic in all countries. Endemic means that if they look for it, they can find it. That bacteria is everywhere. It's in every country of the world. An outbreak, and this is really important, outbreaks occur every 2 to 3 years, irrespective of the amount of vaccination coverage. Well, I think our public health departments have just forgotten that little piece that came out in the British Medical Journal in 2013, which is a pretty recent publication. So every time there's an outbreak and you've got like 8 or 10 cases of pertussis, the Public Health Service throws their hands up and goes into hysteria saying, we need to revaccinate all these kids because they've all are getting pertussis, when they don't understand the life cycle of the bacterium. And it's going to happen every 2 or 3 years, no matter how much vaccine they give. Pertussis spreads from person to person by coughing or sneezing. And as I said before, the greatest risk of complications are in infants under 3 months of age because of the smallness of their trachea. Physicians and laboratories are required to report this, even report laboratory confirmed and clinically suspected cases, which is really interesting, because if they are reporting that people have a lot of cough, worse at night, not coughing anything up, no real mucus, no fever, then that's a clinically suspected case of pertussis. And in the wintertime, how many times do you get coughs in the wintertime? You just get coughs. I mean, there's lots of stuff. You're in the house a lot. There's lots of toxins around. So they report clinically suspected cases, which may look like the incidence of pertussis is going up when it's really not, because it's not laboratory confirmed. So how deadly is pertussis? Well, they say that the death rate from pertussis, remember, it's not really from pertussis, it's from complications of bacteria that causes pneumonia from pertussis. So this is CDC data that says death rates in developing countries, like third world countries that maybe don't have the vaccines or don't have access to antibiotics if they get the secondary infection, may be somewhere around 4%. But in developing countries like Canada, the US, most of Europe, it's less than 0.2%. So I have a relatively new patient in the office with a new baby. It's their first baby, and they're really nervous parents, and they chose not to vaccinate. And when they took the child to the pediatrician lit off on them and started yelling at them and said, if your child doesn't get a pertussis vaccine now at 2 months of age, by 4 months, they're going to be dead. And these parents were scared to death. I mean, they did a phone call consult with me. Mom was crying. Dad was a nervous wreck. It's like, wait a minute, it doesn't really happen. We explained it all to them. And we told them to come to our office, where we have a great nurse practitioner that takes care of all the babies, and to avoid that pediatrician's office because of the fear factor of what they try to do. Serious complications are extremely rare. And even the pneumonia only occurs in up to 10% of cases. So I think you're seeing from these, even these initial slides, this pertussis really isn't anything to be afraid of. You know, it says under the 3 months of age, and we're going to get into that a little bit later when they talk about cocooning and this big push to get, grandparents all vaccinated before they see the baby. There's a really important slide. We're going to talk about that in a little bit later. So what is the history of pertussis vaccines? Well, remember they identified the pertussis bacteria in 1906. In 1914, they started with what was called whole cell manufacture and 6 different whole cell pertussis. And there were 6 manufacturers who were playing around with trying to make that. Now, when they said whole cell, remember all those different antigens and all those different proteins that I listed before? They used little particles of those and injected the whole bacteria into people. And that's what whole cell pertussis was into babies. And this is really important. In the new and non-official remedies published by the AMA in 1914, when they first came out with these vaccines, this document listed all treatments that had possible efficacy but were not proven to work. The first whole cell clinical pertussis trials were complete failures because what they found was the vaccinated and unvaccinated developed illness at the same rate. So later, what they said in that journal that we just talked about, that new and non-official remedies published by the American Medical Association, after they'd been doing these trials and nothing was working and vaccinated and unvaccinated still got pertussis, it said the whole cell pertussis vaccine was removed from the American Medical Association list of remedies because its usefulness was shown to be equivocal at best. Now, keep that in mind. That's from the very beginning. They've known that it didn't work. It didn't get any better as time went on. In the early 1940s, whole cell was combined with diphtheria and tetanus to make the diphtheria tetanus whole cell pertussis vaccine. And try as I might, and I've 50,000 hours of research. I've spent a lot of time with this. I've actually went to Bethesda to the History of Medicine Museum and got permission to go down in their basement and put on white gloves and not touch anything of the old journals to look for this and also to look at some of the old polio data to find out how many cases of how many people were really put on iron lung machines, like really, really put on. And I even went so far as to look at how many iron lung machines were manufactured to try to backfill it that way and couldn't find anything. And so if anybody really finds that data, I'd like to know. And I've never found any reason why they suddenly decided to combine diphtheria, tetanus, and whole cell pertussis. There's no studies, no science, no research that I can find. The same thing with MMR. Why did they suddenly decide to combine measles, mumps, and rubella, and sometimes varicella, chickenpox? Well, that which has been awful. That vaccine, with the 4 of those vaccines have been on and off the market several times because of causing seizures. But I could find, and I still to date can't find any reason why they did this. Suzanne Humphreys and I even collaborated on this a bit to see if we couldn't track this down to find out what made them say it was okay to put all these toxoids together. And somebody somewhere went, let's save some research time and just pull them all together. Was the best that we could find. There really wasn't anything. And then between the 1940s and the 1960s, physicians insisted and continued vaccinating with the whole cell pertussis vaccine, even though they knew it was causing damage. When you read the literature from the 1940s, they knew it. They knew that, a certain percentage of kids were going to get severely injured by the whole cell vaccine. They said, but that's all we got. And we got to use it because we don't want kids getting pertussis because they might die. Put that in context with what I just said about how low the death rate is. And remember, it was in the 1940s when penicillin first came out, so they could actually even treat the pneumonia that may have been secondary to the pertussis. So at about that same time, in the 1920s, was the first acellular pertussis vaccine that was developed by Park Davis. It consisted of just the bacterial cell wall and none of those toxins that I had listed previously. 1920, keep that in mind. So through the 1940s and 50s and 60s, they were using the whole cell even though they knew it caused brain damage. But since the 1920s, they had a acellular pertussis vaccine that was less inflammatory and less toxic. And in 1937, the first patented acellular vaccine was brought to market using only pertussis toxin inactivated by formaldehyde. But through the 40s, 50s, and 60s, they were brain damaging kids because it was harder to make an acellular vaccine and it cost more money to make. So beginning in the early 1960s, at least one article was published every single year describing the horrible effects of the whole cell pertussis vaccines, even though the acellular had been available for 40 years. And beginning in the 1970s, clinical trials began with various dosages of the acellular pertussis vaccine to see if they could figure out what was the right combination of all those antigens, those antigens that I listed. It was a literal experiment trying to find the right recipe and the right combinations of these pertussis toxins to put in the vaccines. Various amount of the antigens were used in the vaccine studies. These were the ones that I had listed previously, and they trialed somewhere between 2.3 micrograms and 40 micrograms of pertussis toxin. And you can read each one of those for yourself. Well, here's the big unanswered question. If 3.2 micrograms was enough to develop an antibody to pertussis toxin, why did they use 40 micrograms? And if 1.6 was enough, why did they use 23.4? Why did they have to use these higher doses? And there were dozens and dozens and dozens of these clinical trials that were done during this period of time with various concentrations, literally as an experiment to see if they could figure out the right recipe for this vaccine. And I looked all these references that are on these slides. I re-looked them up last night and got the correct links on there for you. So the World Health Organization, they finally just thought that they had come up with the right combination of the right amount of proteins. And so in 1996, they adopted a protocol for manufacturing the acellular pertussis vaccine. And manufacturing today, well, even though they have the right recipe with the right amount of ingredients, the right amount of micrograms of each one of those things, even today, the final pertussis vaccine solutions can vary greatly from one lot to another and one manufacturer to another. So if your child's going in and getting a pertussis vaccine, a DPT at 2, 4, and 6 months, and you're getting 3 different manufacturers that are making the DPT vaccine, you're getting different doses of these pertussis antigens, and you don't even know it. And I'm sure your doctor doesn't know it either. So what did they find? The pertussis antigens can vary between the vaccines. The amount of each antigen may vary widely, and which pertussis family was chosen to make the vaccine can vary widely too, because there are multiple different strains of Bordetella pertussis. And sometimes they use genetically modified strains intended to lower the pertussis toxin toxicity. So they're using genetically modified bacteria sometimes to make the vaccine. The production, purification, and detoxification processes during manufacturing, that sometimes they use glutaraldehyde, sometimes they use formaldehyde, sometimes they use hydrogen peroxide, or genetic modification to convert the toxin to a toxoid. So I still have it. I have a graphic of a witch over a big cauldron, stirring this big cauldron. It's like
I was just gonna say that it sounds like a witch's brew.
Witch's brew, exactly. The type of adjuvant may used and the amount of the adjuvant used, that we know that the DPT vaccines all contain aluminum, but aluminum hydroxide, aluminum phosphate, and aluminum sulfide are all 3 different forms of aluminum. The carriers have different amounts of toxicity. And so you may have different aluminums in each one of the vaccines. and the types of preservatives used. And thimerosal, even though it is out of the vaccines in the US, it's still in vaccines used internationally. And sometimes they use 2-phenoxyethanol instead of thimerosal. And that particular publication from the World Health Organization lists all the different pertussis vaccines used globally, and it will tell you what the preservative type is in it. Ted, I can send you this PowerPoint
That would
afterwards.
be great. Thank you.
Send out, so people don't have to try to scribble down furiously those links and everything. So do pertussis, so with all these different processes, all these different vaccine products, all these different witches brews, when you get a vaccine, to pertussis, do the antibodies that are generated, which of course is the only reason to vaccinate, right? And when they do the clinical trials, if you inject foreign matter and it creates an antibody, that is the definition of effective. It did what it was supposed to do. When I injected that foreign matter and I got an antibody, it's effective. It did what it was supposed to do, which is the definition of effective. But the big unknown question in all of vaccinology is, when you have an antibody, does it keep you from getting sick? The answer is no. Because antibodies in immunology are late to the game. They're not preventive on the front end. It's another part of the myth and lie we've been told for 200 years. So if you get an antibody, does it protect infants from contracting pertussis? Well, in 1977, Stewart in the UK did the first, maybe the only vaccinated versus unvaccinated study. Now, I don't know how many of you guys watched the documentary that Bigtree just put out
Yes.
a couple of days ago, Inconvenient Study. Well, believe it or not, there are a lot of unvaccinated studies. In fact, Bobby Kennedy and Brian Hooker wrote a book called Vax versus Unvaxxed. And Brian's a good friend of mine. And he told me about that book. He said, Bobby called him one day. I don't know, this book came out, 5, 6, 7 years ago now, and said, Brian, I want you to spend a little bit of time seeing if you can find any studies at all that really had a vax versus unvaxxed. Are there really an unvaccinated cohort? And Brian said to me, he goes, well, I thought that ought to be about a Saturday afternoon's worth of work about it. Well, then he found like 63 studies, well done, published studies. I think the number was 63, that they really did have an unvaccinated cohort. And they had to go back quite a ways to find them. Well, here was one of them. That was done in 1977. It was done, in 1977, Stewart published this. Then he retrospectively looked back at a campaign they did in 1948 and another one they did in 1957. And his conclusion was that vaccination gave none protection to infants. An analysis showed the incidence of pertussis was no different between the vaccinated or the unvaccinated group. 50% of the children who received whole cell had serious adverse reactions, including seizures, shock, and severe side effects to the brain. And the claim by officials that the risks of whooping cough were lower in those who were vaccinated was at best questionable. And he published that in a journal in the Lancet in 1977. He went on to say, the steady decline of whooping cough between 1930 and 1957 was a linear progression of a lessening in frequency and deaths of pertussis. And since this pattern was well established before the study that they did of this mass vaccination they did in 1957, there is no evidence that vaccination played any role, a major role in decline or incidence of mortality in the trends and events. Well, that should have been enough to close the book right there, right? Never, not. Because this is the pertussis mortality chart. It shows you the deaths per 100,000 of pertussis. And this was how the vaccine was bringing things down. This arrow points to, I think the pertussis vaccine came out in 1942, the one that they were starting using, or I'm sorry, that this points over here to 1951, but it actually really came out a little bit before that. But look at where they stopped tracking it was in 1966. They stopped tracking it 40 years ago, 50 years ago. And so it's flatline now, and they don't want you to know that. So these antibodies, the MMWR is put out by the CDC. It's usually topically related. They do a lot of them. There's one that comes out every couple of weeks, and they're not just about vaccines. They're about all kinds of things like seatbelts and pregnancy and alcoholism, drug use, all that sort of stuff. This particular MMR quote from this one in 1997, and that article is still available there, says there is no direct correlation between the level of pertussis antibodies and protection against pertussis. The findings of efficacy studies have not demonstrated a direct correlation between antibody response and protection against pertussis disease. So again, when you get a vaccine, excuse me, and you inject it, and I always call vaccines foreign matter because that's exactly what they are. Lots of proteins, lots of chemicals, lots of adjuvants, aluminum, thimerosal, things like that, cow blood, chicken parts, dog kidney cells, cells from army worms, all kinds of things. So I always call that stuff foreign matter. When you inject foreign matter into a baby and you develop an antibody, that means that in scientific research, by definition, the development of that antibody means injecting that foreign matter was effective. I mean, look it up. The definition of effective is that it does what it was intended to do. Well, the vaccine was intended to create an antibody. So that's where it's called effective, even though we as doctors and the general population, when they hear the word effective, they think it's a synonym for protection, and it's not.
Right.
It is absolutely not. So that you can have very high antibody levels. And this is when I was studying the tetanus stuff. This was another place where I've got at least 6 or 7 published cases in my database that people had very high tetanus antibodies from previous vaccines, and they contracted tetanus anyways. So again, that was another phase of what blew vaccines out of the water for me, was that tetanus is not uniformly fatal. You can have 4 or more tetanus shots and still get tetanus. You can have very high tetanus antibodies and still get tetanus. Well, if it was true for tetanus, it was true for the rest of them. So what are we doing?
So Sherri, so what you're saying is that then when people have antibody levels that are high, it's not specific to tetanus or any tetanus antigen that might be in the vaccine. It could be to any of the ingredients.
Exactly, which are never tested for. They never look at an antibody level against any of the other foreign proteins that are in there. And proteins are what stimulate the body to create an antibody response, foreign proteins. That's why they go through all this stuff.
So that antibody raise is very non-specific in most cases. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying they never test for it.
Okay.
Like if you've got dog kidney cells or cells from Chinese hamster ovaries, those are foreign proteins. They never test an antibody level for those. You can't find what you're not looking for. And if you're not really looking for that, you don't find it, right? They just want to know if we get an antibody level from the foreign proteins from the coating of the pertussis bacteria that we injected.
You know, to me, this is what makes me angry, because there's a deliberate fraud happening here. Like you said, they're using a word that is not the way the public understands it, and they do that deliberately.
Right.
And I struggle with the people who intentionally are causing harm and still persist. I mean, but we saw that with the Inconvenient Study documentary.
Well, and how many times, I mean, it's from Nazi Germany, from Goebbels, who said, if you repeat repeat it often enough, people will believe it. Well, how many times over the last 100 years have we heard safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective, and nobody bothers to pull out a dictionary and look up the definition of effective. And nobody bothers to say, if I have an antibody, will it keep me from getting sick? And we've got cases after cases after cases in pertussis and mumps and tetanus and measles, and that if people have had 2 or more of these shots and have a high antibody level and contract the illness anyways. So it's not protective. It's never been proven to be safe. And when you look up the definition of effective in the dictionary, it literally says it does what it's intended to do. And in vaccine research, what they are intending to do is to generate an antibody that does nothing except perhaps cause autoimmune disease.
The converse is also true, I think, Sherri, that some people are measured for antibody levels. They don't have them, but they actually may have immunity to the disease. In other words, it can be the converse as well, which means people are then getting repeated shots, sometimes for rubella, for example, that they really don't need.
They wouldn't have even needed the first one, but anyways, that's
You know what I mean? In other words,
know.
they use that as a thing. But it's not just the general public too. It's the medical profession as well. They think that antibody titers equal immunity.
100%.
Right.
You know, because that is the fourth way you prove that you're immune. You've either had the infection, you've had a shot, or that you have an antibody titer, which is they define that antibody titer as proof of immunity on your exemption forms. So let's continue here. I'm about a third of the way through my slides, just so you know. So the World Health Organization says the exact contribution of the pertussis antibodies is not clear. That was pretty recently, 2015. That's a pretty recent study. That isn't one from the 1940s.
I didn't see that on headlines in any newspaper.
Of course not. And then, although antibodies produced against Bordetella pertussis antigens are thought to play a crucial role in protecting against the disease, the antibody level associated with clinical protection, we don't know. Another publication from 2015. So does that mean you need this much antibody or you need this much antibody to protect you?
Or it's got nothing to do with the antibodies.
Or it has nothing to do with the antibodies. Yep, exactly. So the transition from whole cell to acellular pertussis, at least in the US, I think that's true in Canada too, isn't it?
Yes.
To use acellular pertussis. Well, and from the 1970s to 1996, when they came up with the recipe, right? Various research studies contrived with various components and various dosage regimens, which obviously resulted in various results. Think you got, different combinations of micrograms and different combinations of those antigens that are going together. So they really couldn't do a real analysis to know what was working and what wasn't working because you weren't comparing an apple to an apple. You were comparing an apple to a grapefruit or a banana or something like that because they were different doses with different things that were happening. By 1981, a causal relationship between whole cell pertussis vaccines and seizures was confirmed. The response to the public outcry over adverse reactions to the whole cell pertussis, the discussion turned to Japan that adopted the use of acellular around 1980. And actually it was the whole cell, this brain damage caused by the whole cell pertussis vaccine that led to, Barbara Loe Fisher writing the book, A Shot in the Dark, and led to the development of the 1986 Injury Compensation Act in the United States, which is now, there's actually been a bill that's been introduced in the US to repeal that act. And there's also a bill that's on the floor to repeal the PrEP Act. I highly doubt they're going to go anywhere, but at least they've made an effort and at least it's in the public mind. I actually wrote a Substack about that last Saturday, if you're interested.
I'd like to see that.
If you go to, it's my Substack is drtenpenny.substack.com. And you can look at the one that was just posted it was either last Saturday or the Saturday before. It was in the last 2 weeks that I wrote about the repealing of this act. So in 1997, ACIP begins recommending DTaP. So it's not been used, whole cell hasn't been used in the US since 2002, but it's still routinely used around the world. And that is so disturbing to me because they go into these little villages in Africa and India and China and South America and all these places where they don't have conventional medical care. And they do these big campaigns. They call them National Immunization Days. They call them NIDs, where they may vaccinate somewhere around 450,000 kids on a campaign as they march across the country. They get to the other side and they all high five each other for all the vaccines they delivered. And nobody ever goes back through to see how many of those children were injured or died or now have seizure disorders and they have no access to medical care, no access to medications and all of these things. They just routinely walk across the country and poison all these children. I mean, that's one of the reasons why about 6 months ago, I started calling the I decided I wasn't going to talk about the childhood vaccination schedule anymore. I was going to call it what it is, the pediatric poisoning program, because that's exactly what it is. And for adults, I'm calling it the adult assault agenda. You know, that you have to get shingles and flu shot and pneumonia shots and COVID and all this other stuff. They're just assaulting you. I just visualize these doctors going around just with wildly just a syringe in their hand, just vaccinating everybody. So it's really gotten some traction to get people to say, call it what it is, the pediatric poisoning program, that doctors bully and harass parents to do it on time. You got to get on this program. Oh, excuse me, doctor, I choose to not participate in your pediatric poisoning program. I'm going to go see somebody else, or just not come in here at all.
Or you're fired, or you're fired. You know, firing the patients is a very common if they pick them on pediatricians, if you don't obey.
And if you don't obey, and I would say, you know, I've had so many parents over the years that have come to me and said, my pediatrician won't see me anymore. So it's the best thing that ever happened to your kid.
Yeah.
The best thing that ever happened to you, that your pediatrician refuses to see you. Because if they really get, you know, what you really need, you know, we've lost the multi-generational care of children. You know, years ago, when your child got sick, you'd go and ask your mother or your grandmother, you know, they're crying and they got a little bit of a fever. Is this something I should be concerned about? I mean, after all, they raised you and they may have raised 10 other kids, and they can look at that baby and go, no, they're just fine. You know, make sure they're still peeing, and, you know, they'll be fine in the morning, because they have experience. You need an experienced person, not necessarily a person with a white coat to be able to ask. Maybe somebody at your church or your gym or your yoga class or your mom or your sister or your grandmother, or somebody that has experience with children that could say, no, I don't know. They look a little listless to me. I think that maybe they're dehydrated. Maybe you should see a doctor. And at that point, you can always go to the ER or an urgent care. They can't refuse care for you, whether it be based on your vaccination status. So there's always a backup plan. And so the best thing that can happen to you is if your pediatrician kicks you out of their office. I think that's just marvelous. So anyways, let's proceed here. The acellular pertussis vaccines less toxic, and are they safer? Well, manufacturers have difficulty making the pertussis vaccines to contain enough inactivated pertussis toxin to generate an antibody and have less information of the brain. That's why when the acellular pertussis vaccines came out in the 1920s, they didn't take on really quickly, because they were more expensive to make, because they had to fiddle with them more to generate an antibody and have less brain inflammation. Therefore, the DTaP vaccine is associated with the same potential serious neurological side effects as the whole cell, but the reactions may be less. I mean, it's sort of like saying you get a flu shot, you can get the flu anyways, but it won't be as severe, maybe. So all of these are still the same thing. They can still cause the same serious side effects. They are because they have a lower level of proteins in them. They tend to be less inflammatory, but you can have the same serious side effects with an acellular pertussis vaccine as with whole cell. Now, what about pertussis vaccines for teenagers and adults? Well, prior to the arrival of the two DTaP vaccines in 2005, debates were going on for years of whether or not teenagers and adults should get a booster, because after all, those antibodies fade. They didn't do you any good in the first place, but now that they're gone, we need to get more of them just in case they did something.
It's a bit confusing, I think, Sherri, just for people that don't see just the switching around of the letters. Tdap versus DTaP. I think that's, maybe you're going to point this out in a second, how that's one indicates the booster. That's the DTaP. I think, no, the TDAP is the booster, whereas the other one is actually a more of the antigen, I think.
Yeah, there's less amount of pertussis antigen in the Tdap that they give to teenagers and adults, because you're not even supposed to give a pertussis vaccine to children over the age of 7. Because it's highly inflammatory. I remember that from medical school, and I've looked it up several times in older infectious disease journals. But after 7, it's highly much more inflammatory. So they couldn't give the same vaccine, the same DTA capital P to teenagers and adults because of the large amount of inflammation of the pertussis toxin. So they had to reformulate it and make the P small to separate the two so that you would know the difference. Because you're not supposed to give pertussis shots to teenagers or adults. You're just not supposed to do it, but they do it anyway.
And sometimes they actually change the letters around. So they have DTaP, D capital D, capital T, small a, capital P, which is the full-on shot for babies, infants, right? Then they have what you say is just making the P small, but they also call it TDAP, which is a capital T and a small d, because I think the antigen, the diphtheria antigen is also smaller, and then a small a and a small p too. So it gets a little bit confusing. I got to say, I've had it going around in my head a little bit lately, so I just thought I might point that out.
Well, it's because you're not supposed to give any of those to adults. You're not supposed to do it. So since we're not supposed to do it at all, we'll just give you a little bit. And that's what, what people would say to me, like during COVID, can I get just one shot? And my answer to them was a little poison's still poison.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you get 1 or 8 or however many boosters you get, where you get a little bit of the DTaP, it's still poison and still highly inflammatory. And serious side effects can happen in adults too. I did a court case. I don't do court cases anymore, but when I was doing court cases, I did a court case for a I think he was 42 or 43-year-old man who was a college professor and had never been vaccinated, but was going to Punta Cana on vacation. And his doctor convinced him that the food poisoning down there is really bad. So you should get a hepatitis A vaccine. Excuse me. Because it would protect you against food poisoning. And with much, he's like, I don't know. He said, but then he decided he didn't want it to ruin his vacation. So he got a hepatitis A vaccine. From that one vaccine, he'd not had any other vaccines his whole life. From that hepatitis A vaccine, he ended up on total disability.
Oh my goodness.
Chronically disabled, couldn't work. He ended up with double vision, all kinds of problems with headaches, and ended up chronically disabled. Couldn't go back to work and lost his livelihood over trying to possibly prevent food poisoning. So I just say that to remind people that this is, even though we're talking about children here, serious side effects happen in adults too, which I'm going to point out in a minute if I can get through these. And get through these shots or these slides. As previously stated, there was no well-accepted standardized marker to show that the protection that was provided from the pertussis vaccine. So in all of these kids and all these studies, because there were various doses of different vaccines, and it was never able to be standardized. Do we need this much pertussis antibody or this much pertussis antibody? So when they started looking at how do we decide that there's enough protective antibody in these teenagers, because we don't even know how much protective antibody is necessary in babies. So they didn't really know what to do with that. So they didn't know what they intended that to be. So instead, what they did, since there was no standardized level, they decided that they would just, how would they investigate the effectiveness? So what they did was they said that it's not required to know how to antibody. We just assume that we're just going to boost it up. If they get some antibodies, that's good enough. And then we're going to assume that that's effective. That's how they decided to start giving teenagers booster shots. The consensus decision, what they called, was a serological bridge, an analytic parameter used to compare an antibody response between two different vaccines. The DTA capital P in children and the TDAP in adults. They said, well, we're just going to kind of sort of compare the two and see what the antibody levels are. So they came up with a study that compared an antibody response to one TDAP vaccine as compared to how much antibodies got developed in a baby, different age, different everything, that got 3 vaccines. So they're going to compare the antibody responses to that. And if they were similar, they would say that brand new Tdap vaccines given to teenagers and adults was effective.
You know, it's hard to believe it's this bad, but it is.
Yeah, and it's going to get worse. So hang with me here.
Yeah.
Ted. So again, effective is not equal to clinical protection. And in fact, it's effective is not worth anything. They just sort of make it up as they go. Literally, this slide really tells you they make it up as they go. Anything to get a vaccine approved. Safety assessment of both Adacel and Boostrix, which are the two different vaccines given to teenagers. Adverse events were only followed for 15 days. How long does it take to come down with a neurological side effect or an autoimmune disease? Sometimes at least months, sometimes years. Safety of the Tdap was evaluated when comparing to adverse events of persons receiving just a tetanus booster, a tetanus and diphtheria booster. The placebo for Boostrix with TD and the placebo for Adacel was TD from a different manufacturer. So they couldn't even compare one study to another because they had different vaccines with different placebos. And look at what the placebo was. It wasn't a shot of saline. It was another shot. And the tetanus shot is in the DTaP vaccine. So they're comparing the placebo effect of tetanus and diphtheria to the effect of tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis. There was no placebo there at all in either one of those. So did we even need teen boosters? Is the incidence of pertussis really increasing? Well, according to research by James Sherri, and if you ever read any of his papers, they're actually very well done. And even though I think in his training, he's pro-vaccine, his studies are very well done and his publications are very neutral. I mean, the publications that he writes, he's done a lot and he's written a lot of things. They don't come off pro-vaccine and they don't come off anti-vaccine. They just report the data. His research and the stuff he does are very good. Pertussis outbreaks follow this pattern every 2 to 5 years that we already mentioned before. Even with widespread vaccination programs, the same cyclic pattern still occurs. The increase in reported pertussis over the last 2 decades may be due to greater awareness of pertussis, that people know that it's a cough, no mucus, no fever, worse at night, rather than the use of ineffective vaccines. And also the report of non-laboratory confirmed vaccine, only clinically suspected. If doctors are reporting a lot of clinically suspected, it will make like the rates going up.
Right.
Maybe the cough is caused by parapertussis or caused by chemtrails.
I was just going to say that
in the air, right? So this was really a very good study that Sherri did. Sherri goes on to say the studies prolonged of cough illness in adolescents and adults reveal that 13 to 20% are due to Bordetella pertussis, making the rate of cough illness somewhere between 370 and 1,500 per 100,000 population. These data suggest that there are between 800,000 and 3.3 million cases of pertussis per year, irrespective of vaccination rate. So there's a ton of pertussis going on out there, a lot, not being diagnosed, not causing pneumonia side effects and complications, not keeping people home from work. I mean, how many people have you worked with and you hear them coughing and hacking all day long, right? So there's a lot of pertussis going on out there, a lot, and not a lot of sickness. There's just a lot of sickness to where people are getting sick, and it's happening irrespective of vaccination rate. So in 2015, data from 19 high and middle income countries identified no evidence of a widespread resurgence in pertussis. Countries where the number of pertussis cases appeared to be increasing, the incidence may be mainly attributed to the 3 and 5 year cyclic pattern of pertussis, irrespective of vaccination rate. Now, the World Health Organization said this in a publication. That's a quote from that paper. How many doctors know that? None. How many public health department people know that? None. How many of them are illiterate? After the end of COVID, after 2020, I wanted to create a t-shirt. Michelle wouldn't let me do this. I wanted to create a t-shirt with tombstones on it, that the tombstone said the death of literacy, the death of common sense, the death of being able to listen to your patient. And I wanted to put that, and she wouldn't let me make the t-shirt. She wouldn't let me do it. So here's pertussis vaccines through the ages. We're making our way through this. We went from having no vaccines in pregnancy because we couldn't even give a pregnant woman an antihistamine or tuna fish or a glass of wine, but now they get annual flu shots, and you'll see that they voted now to give a Tdap to every pregnancy. And now we're also giving them COVID shots, RSV shots, and there are other shots in development. And if you're Rh negative, you're also getting 1 or 2 RhoGAM shots. In 2005, 2 Tdap vaccines approved for teenagers. This was the Adacel and the Boosterix. And I want to make a comment about Boosterix. Boosterix is made by GlaxoSmithKline. Excuse me a second. Let me take a sip. Boosterix is made by GlaxoSmithKline. GlaxoSmithKline has I guess it's a copyright, and all the names of their vaccines end in RIX. So there's Boosterix, Pediarix, Shingrix,
Right.
the shingles vaccine, and I think there's a couple of flu shots that end in that. They're always the worst vaccines ever in terms of they're the filthiest. They've got the most horrible toxic adjuvants in them. They've got the highest concentrations of aluminum in them. So I always tell parents, one of the things you need to do if you're going to vaccinate is ask the doctor, what brand do they have in the office? And if it's a brand that ends in RIX, say, no, thank you, I don't want that one. And if they say, well, that's the only one we carry, well, then I'm going to go somewhere else, or I'm not going to vaccinate today because I don't want that stuff injected in me. And so for people who must vaccinate, they're like under court order, or they're in the military or something like that, make sure you don't get vaccinated with a vaccine ending in RIX. And they're all just awful. They're just terrible. I mean, none of them are great, but they're even worse. So in 2006, ACIP recommended giving the Tdap vaccine to postpartum women based on safety studies because none had been done because the safety studies had been done on non-pregnant women. So here's a pregnant woman, she has the baby, and as soon as after she has the baby, think about all the hormones and all the things that are going on in the system. And we don't know if that any of those antigens inside of the Tdap, it passed through the milk into the baby, because the only studies they did was seeing if whether or not non-pregnant women of the same age developed an antibody. That was their clinical trial. The working group established on vaccines during pregnancy and breastfeeding developed these guidelines for vaccinating pregnant and breastfeeding women. These will blow your mind. They made the decision to go ahead and vaccinate pregnant women with no data. The only clinical trials that have been done were small groups in the 1930s and the 1940s. There were no safety studies done on mother and fetus. There weren't even any animal studies that had been done. There was no burden of illness, meaning like, is there a whole bunch of pertussis going on in pregnant women that we have to be concerned that they need to vaccinate them? There wasn't any of that to prove that they even needed it. And when they were having these discussions, the manufacturers brought up not safety, but legal liability if they would be protected by the Vaccine Injury Compensation Act, because they didn't know if, they are protected if they give a shot to a toddler or a young child, but are they still going to be protected if something happens to that fetus? There was no safety data to know that. So what they were most concerned about was illegal liability. And they said, oh, we know what we'll do to test safety. We'll start giving it to pregnant women, and we'll set up registries. So if the woman has a side effect, she can go and report it to the registry. And that's how we'll find out after our post-release whether or not we're causing any harm. Well, women didn't know those registries existed, and neither did the doctors. So they collected no data. And because there was no data, they said nobody was having any side effects. So therefore, it's safe and effective. That's how that got into pregnant women.
This is criminal.
Vaccination was recommended even though scientific evidence was limited. It does not sufficiently address safety for the woman or the fetus. And healthcare providers were told to weigh the theoretical risks before they administered the DTaP vaccine. And now they don't even consider those, they just give it. So this was, let me go back here a second. So this was in 2008. In 2011, they recommended giving the DTaP for all unvaccinated pregnant women during between 28 and 32 weeks of gestation. It actually says on the package insert, you can give it at any time during gestation, at any time. When those rapidly developing cells of that fetus are developing, you can just throw sand in that gas tank and see what happens. And then 2 years later, antibodies were measurable 7 days after the DTaP vaccine and within 2 weeks, and then they rapidly decline. Nonetheless, ACIP voted to vaccinate all pregnant women during every pregnancy, regardless of previous vaccination status. So if you're not pregnant and you're a man and you get a booster, you get one. If you're a pregnancy of childbearing age and you want to have more than one child, for each one of those childs, even if they happen in sequence, a year, 1 year right after the other, they don't measure antibody levels. They just give another shot because the antibodies go away 7 days after vaccination. But what about the rest of those proteins? What about the chemicals? What about the aluminum? What about all of that stuff? Well, it doesn't really matter. It's just safe and effective. We're just going to give it. What is the incidence of pertussis amongst pregnant women? Well, in 2008, pertussis, because pertussis is a nationally notifiable disease in the US. Is it notifiable in Canada? Ted, do you know? Or
I don't know. Stephen, do you know the answer to that? I would assume it is.
I can't really answer that question, but I don't think it's notifiable from what I can recall from my last pertussis outbreak locally, which was quite a few years ago.
So there was no data, and it's because there had been none that was collected. It's notifiable here because in the US, if there's an outbreak, oh my gosh, we got to vaccinate more, right? So they collect it in order to do more vaccinating, not to protect the public health. Because remember, in the US, high vaccination rates and low vaccination rate and low infection rates are the definition of public health. It does not matter that 76% of children in America have one or more chronic illness. That doesn't count for public health. The only thing that counts for public health is high vaccination rates and low infection rates. So the burden of pertussis is similar in pregnant women than in non-pregnant people. So what is the incidence in non-pregnant people? What is the incidence of pertussis in the general public? Well, in 2008, there were 13,000 cases reported. 50% of those were in people over the age of 20, assumed to be childbearing age. And then 2016, and then 2023. But we're still giving it anyways, because you might be the one that gets exposed to that. And you're right, Ted, this is absolutely criminal. In 2017, vaccinating pregnant women has emerged as an important and successful public health global intervention. And I looked this up from the FDA, and that is word for word what it says. I looked it up last night when I was checking these references. It's an important intervention globally. Now, are DTaP vaccines safe for pregnant women and their babies? Well, the FDA I'm going to skip through this because this has changed, and I meant to change that slide. So Boostrix, carcinogenesis and mutagenesis not tested as the same for every other vaccine on the schedule. They don't test whether or not the vaccines can cause cancer, can cause genetic disruption, can cause can cause infertility. So that's out of the Boostrix package insert. And there's no adequate or well-controlled studies in pregnant women because animal reproduction studies are not always predictive of human response. Boostrix should only be given to pregnant women if it's clearly needed, except they give it in every pregnancy. That's directly from the package insert. Now, what about Adacel? Same thing, not tested, not tested. And it's not known if Adacel can cause fetal harm when administered to pregnant women. Therefore, it should be given only when clearly needed, except they always give it and they give it in each pregnancy because you might be the one who gets a cough disease that keeps you up at night. So here's the ingredients. Okay. I think Adacel, correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's made by Santa Fe Pasteur, and Boostrix is definitely made by GlaxoSmithKline. But look at all that junk. That's why I call vaccination injecting foreign matter. Now the latex caps, since I originally made this slide, they've gone away from latex in almost all of them, and they use N-butyl rubber now, which is an inert sort of thing, because when they had latex in the caps, when you stuck the needle in and then you sucked out the juice that's in the syringe, that needle was coated with latex. And so when they were injected into the baby, the risk of reactions to latex or to start developing the sensitivity came from that needle that went through the latex stopper. And at one point in time, this was probably 7 or 8 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, most of the vaccines had latex toppers. And so if the baby got every shot, they had 29 exposures to latex by the time they were 1 year of age. Is it any wonder that they had asthma, eczema, all those different different skin rashes because of the sensitivity to the latex? But look at the difference here. Now, this one has this many micrograms, and this one has this many micrograms. This one has all these other ingredients. Look at up here. Adacel has 5 micrograms of formaldehyde. Boostrix has 100 micrograms of formaldehyde. It has 4,500 micrograms of sodium chloride, which stings and burns. All these different sizes of proportions, the different things that are made from the bovine casein. Casein may sensitize kids to cow's milk. Bovine extract, which is fetal bovine serum, cow blood, that is in all of these different things. Do you really want that injected into your teenager, or do you want that injected into you as an adult? But despite these concerns, they advise this on every pregnancy, and they usually advise it between the 28-week and 32-week. They give it at the same date on the same day as a flu shot, and they probably gave DTaP, DTaP, flu shots, and COVID at the same time when they were given COVID vaccines. Women not previously vaccinated should be administered at least immediately after postpartum. And these are references from the early days when they were doing this, from 2006 and 2008. And now it's even worse. No study has assessed the safety of repeated use of DTaP during pregnancy. And that's word for word from the CDC. No studies have tested safety. And there it is. There's where it actually says it. There in pink. No study has assessed the safety of repeated doses of DTaP in pregnant women. CDC will monitor and assess the safety of DTaP use in pregnant women. That was from the Pink Book in 2017, which is pretty recent. And they've been using it since 2008. And still no studies to show whether or not it's been safe, that it's safe. Not whether they're even asking you if it's effective. They're telling you they don't even know if it's safe. We're just going to give it and see what happens. So infants and children, this is the Daptocel and the Inforex. These are all the aluminum and things that are in them. Formaldehyde, polysorbate 80, aluminum hydroxide, aluminum phosphate, all those ingredients is stuff that you don't want in your body. These are the precautions for giving the pertussis vaccines. Use precaution if any of these reactions occurred following a previous dose: high-pitched fever, collapse, seizure, persistent uncontrollable crying. Somebody found an article from the 1948 from 1948 that actually wrote this whole article out about this persistent, high-pitched, uncontrollable crying lasting more than 3 hours was an absolute indication of brain injury. And now they just say, oh, that's just a normal thing. That's just what happens when you get vaccines. They'll be okay in a couple of days.
Sherri, could I just ask you a quick question about the vaccine ingredients going across the placenta into the fetus? Because that's just going back to the idea that pregnant women are getting these, particularly they're getting them towards the end. I think the idea being that you create antibodies which go across the placenta and then protect the baby during the early ages. What other things are going across the placenta?
All of it. All that junk is going across because, the Environmental Working Group did that study 2008, I believe, maybe it was a little before that, that they tested cord blood. We had always thought that the placenta was like this little protective cocoon that only let in oxygen and nutrients, and the rest of the stuff stayed out. And they did that study. Maybe it was in 2005. Anyways, what they did was they tested cord blood. So they took the blood directly from the placenta that had been circulating through the baby, and they tested it, and they found this incredibly long list of chemicals and toxicities and how many of them were carcinogenic and all these different things. So they know that everything that goes into the mother and on the mother goes into the baby. And it was a real serious study that was done that really showed that all of that stuff is being injected in the baby.
And if it gets into the baby, I mean, the placenta does provide some kind of I would say, a barrier protection, which I think is kind of essentially permeated by the vaccine ingredients. But I think if it gets through that type of a sieve, it can get into the baby's brain as well. I think that it can pass the blood-brain barrier quite easily if it can get across the placenta. It's like if it get across one, it's small enough particles to get across the other. And then there's also this question of the ovaries in inflammation of places like the ovaries and so on, which they have shown, well, at least they suspect, in the cases of parents who have got COVID shots, mothers who've got COVID shots when they're pregnant, COVID shot ingredients, nanoparticle lipids and so on going across, causing inflammation in the baby's ovaries, potentially in women, causing sterility in the next generation.
Not just ovaries, but also testicles too, in little boys. And one of the things that we were, I had Dr. Kimberly Biss on one of my podcasts, and we were talking about this, and she was talking about how when baby girls are born, and I'm going to get these numbers wrong, but I'll just use these for analysis, that when little baby girls are born, they have about 1 million eggs. And by the time they get to childbearing age, that's dropped down to like 300,000. And then it continues to decline up and through menopause. And that they know that the COVID lipid nanoparticles in adult women go into their ovaries and decrease. And that's what leads to this big infertility problem that we're seeing worldwide, and also goes into the testicles of men. So one of the questions I asked her when we were having this conversation was, if mothers get a COVID shot and that crosses through the placenta and into the babies, does that affect the ovaries of the baby? And now that we were giving even COVID shots to like 6-month-old babies, is that going into the genitals of these little boys, and particularly little girls? And she said, we really don't know. And we won't know until those little girls get to be 12 years of age and see whether or not they start their periods, and whether or not they can get, when they get older, whether or not they can get pregnant. So we are decimating children before they're even born.
We could be preventing puberty in those children.
Yes, exactly. That's what I asked that question, of whether or not they were going to start their periods, and if they don't start their periods when, then there's all of those downline things in girls that become women, that they don't have the protective effects of estrogen. They don't have the developmental effects of progesterone. They don't have all of the lutein and, all the things that happen when you have menarche and you're having cycles. You don't have any of those things. So it doesn't protect your heart, your brain, your bones, any of that stuff. If we have decimated those children for the sake of keeping them from getting a cold, is what was happening with COVID. So I think I I want to skip ahead through these really fast
You're
here.
doing a great job, Sherri. We're really enjoying this. I can see from some of the comments in the notes that people think it's the information is outstanding and very useful. So keep
Okay.
going is what I suggest.
Okay. Well, I'm on slide 65 of 78, just so you know where I am in the presentation, okay? So pertussis vaccines through the ages. Now, we just talked about teenagers, and I just posted this up here again to show I really think that there's two things that people should start doing that are listening to this. Make sure you're talking about the pediatric poisoning program. And anytime you refer to a vaccine at all, stop calling it a vaccine and start calling it foreign matter.
Right.
You're going to inject foreign matter, and that literally came from, I read Gary Matsumoto's book, Vaccine A, and I think that came out in the 90s. And he talked about, Vaccine A, it was about the anthrax vaccine. And there was a section in there I just read and I never forgot. We're in, excuse me, it's kind of like the difference between ingesting and injecting. And he wrote this in his book when he said, I can eat a hamburger and feel just fine. But if I take that same hamburger and I put it into my Vitamix and make it into a slurry and inject it into my arm, I don't think I'll feel very good in the morning. So and that's what we're doing. We're taking look at all this foreign particulate matter and injecting it into people's arm. It's foreign proteins, foreign chemicals, foreign all kinds of things. And we do this multiple times. We do it multiple times, to infants and then teenagers. And thank you for telling me that about because I can't see the chat from where, I can't see the chat at all. So thanks for that. Between January and November of 2014, a total of 9,900 cases of pertussis were reported. In 2006, there were only 4 children of 2006 cases among children 14 to 16. 4 of them were admitted to the hospital for less than 2 days. 1 was admitted for 5 days, and 2,000 were treated at home. So how sick do kids get when they're a teenager, when they get pertussis? Of the 2006 cases, the vaccination status was known for 83%. 87% were fully vaccinated as babies, and they got the teenage booster. And only 36 of the 1,600 people were completely unvaccinated. So 87% were completely vaccinated and ended up with pertussis anyways. 4 were admitted to the hospital for a day or 2. And those were probably teenagers that had asthma or had other respiratory things, and they were probably struggling to breathe. So they put them in the hospital to do some respiratory treatments and put them on some oxygen, give them a little IV hydration, and send them home. Ooh, what's happening to my thing here? 2,000 cases of the 2006 of those during that age group were treated at home. So if anybody's listening to this is thinking about boosting their teenagers, the question would be why? Why inject all that foreign matter when most of the time you just treat them at home? So here's the part about grandparents, and this is really important stuff. They started this concept called cocooning, which meant if we vaccinate all the adults around the baby, and then we will be protecting that baby that's newborn and less than 3 months of age from getting pertussis. Because remember, I said from the very beginning, the only time that pertussis is a serious condition, a serious concern, is in infants less than 3 months because their trachea is so small. So they came up with this concept called cocooning. It was introduced in 2012, where they vaccinate everybody around to ostensibly protect the baby. But are the unvaccinated responsible for spreading the whooping cough? Is it really those filthy, dirty grandparents who refuse to get those shots? Are they the problem? Are they spreading whooping cough? Well, as it turns out, this baboon study is probably one of the most important studies, recent studies that was that have been published on pertussis. So this is really important information. Infant baboons were vaccinated at 2, 4, and 6 months with either acellular or whole cell vaccines. At 7 months, the unvaccinated, vaccinated, and previously infected but recovered vaccines were challenged with pertussis. So they blew the pertussis bacteria in their face. So they actually had to breathe it in. Both the unvaccinated, the vaccinated, and the previously infected who had recovered. The conclusion was that those who had been vaccinated with the acellular vaccines became heavily colonized with the bacteria. They didn't get sick, but the bacteria stuck to their nose and their throat. And they shed the bacteria on top of other people and made them get sick. So they were vaccinated, so they didn't get sick, but the bacteria that got blown in their nose, and remember we said there was between 800,000 and 3 million cases of pertussis floating around out there in the environment. So the chances of being exposed is pretty high. When they expose those babies, they heavily colonize so that they can shed them on other people and making them sick. So is it really the vaccinated that are responsible for spreading whooping cough? A shocking and even damning revelation was published by the National Academy of Sciences. Important paper. The unvaccinated may have very little to do with spreading pertussis because it appears that the spread of pertussis illness is being done by those who have been vaccinated. I will send you these slides. I'll send these slides to Ted. But if you just want to take a picture of a slide, this is the one to take a picture of. You know, all the demands to make and I can't tell you how many calls I get from new grandparents that are so excited to see their baby. And they're like, my kids won't let me come near them unless I get vaccinated. And I don't even get flu shots. I don't get any of that stuff. I don't want to get any of that stuff injected into me. This is it.
Sherri, can I maybe just clarify this? So what you're saying then that in the baboon study, that the ones that were vaccinated had a greater colonization of their noses and were therefore more likely to pass on the disease to someone in their environment. Is that right?
Exactly.
Did it reduce symptoms among the baboons? I mean, would they actually kind of secret passers on? In other words, those that did it disguise symptoms for them?
I think it did. I don't remember. I didn't reread the study last night. But if I remember right, what this study actually showed, let me go back here. In this study down here, acellular pertussis vaccines protect against disease but fail to prevent infection and transmission. So they didn't get sick.
That's my understanding, is that the real risk is that they can be
they get
carrying the
and
pertussis and shedding and make other people sick, but they're not. They don't know they're sick.
Yeah.
Whereas the person who's vaccine free would know they're sick and they would know to stay away.
Exactly. So this was saying that was they blew the pertussis vaccine in their nose, that the ones that had been vaccinated again with acellular pertussis, and I don't remember about the other ones, if the ones that were ill, but this was the conclusion that the ones that have been, because that's the vaccine that they use now here in Canada and the US is acellular pertussis, right?
Yes.
And that's the one that your adult children are wanting you to go get.
Right.
So you go to get that and you get exposed to pertussis, and then you are more likely, because you're holding that new baby, if you just got vaccinated, to blow pertussis on that brand new baby, increasing the risk of that baby that's under 3 months of age, that's a newborn, of contracting pertussis.
Right. So there are actually two components to that. One is you imagine that you're protected, so, and you don't have symptoms, so you're more likely to have the baby come over for a visit. And the second one is you're more highly colonized if you are infected, in which case you're more likely to transmit.
Right. And because there's so much pertussis out there in the environment, 800,000, they estimate 800,000, 300 million people walking around with pertussis. and they just got a cough. It's worse at night. They don't feel sick because in between those cough episodes at night, they don't even know that they're sick. They just got, they go to the doctor. It's like this stupid, nasty cough. It's worse at night. It's keeping me up. It's keeping the household up, but during the day, I don't even have the cough. And the doctor probably doesn't know that it's to test them for pertussis. They probably give them cough medicine and maybe an antibiotic, and that's how they treat them, right? So that's really, really an important piece of information there. So the take home for parents and grandparents: a person vaccinated with the DTaP or other acellular pertussis containing vaccines may become an asymptomatic carrier. And that should say TDAP. I got those letters wrong. It should be capital T, little DAP. May become an asymptomatic carrier. And the concept of cocooning infants, vaccinating those around them, moms, dads, adults, siblings, and grandparents, or teenagers, actually increases the risk of spreading pertussis to the newborn.
Right.
That was the conclusion of that study. Very important study.
And we've known that since 2014.
Yeah. Since 2014, we've known it for 20 years. 22 years almost, really. Because it was published in January of 2014. So what can we do instead? Support your immune system with vitamin D. Make sure that, we routinely test all of our patients this time of year in the office for their vitamin D levels. And when you get your vitamin D level tested by your doctor, ask for the number. Ask them, what is my actual level, doctor, or nurse, or whoever it is that calls you, because the range is 30 to 100. And they'll say, they just report it's in the normal range and it's 31, it may be in the normal range, but it's not in the adequate protection level, which it should be somewhere between 80 and 100, at least 50, preferably between 80 and 100. So when you get your level back, ask the doctor, because if it's 31, it's in the normal range, but that's not protective. Make sure you take care of your gut, because your gut is your number one most important immune system. And for cough illnesses, you can take NAC to loosen up the secretions at night, and to take lots of vitamin C. Dr. Suzanne Humphreys has a protocol for using vitamin C ascorbates and has successfully treated pertussis in all ages, including newborn infants, with liquid vitamin C. It's a pretty long paper. It's like 24 pages. It's free. It's freely available. You can go out to drsuzanne.net and download it. And she talks about using the vitamin C because it eliminates the pertussis toxin. It's it out of your system. So this is what I think happens to medical students. Congratulations, you graduated from pharmaceutical school. And as soon as you get graduate, and I've seen a similar one of these where they walk across the stage, and as soon as they put the thing around their neck and they turn around, they cut off the top of their head and replace the brain with a pharmaceutical, like a pill inside of their head. Thinking on your own is now forbidden. So, and this is my new book. I don't talk about pertussis specifically, but I talk about the adjuvants used by GlaxoSmithKline. There's a lot of stuff in there about aluminum. I tell people that, if you've been in this, like you have, Ted, you've been in this industry for a really long time, you're still going to learn stuff in here that wasn't there before, that you didn't know before. There's something in there for everybody. And then if you're brand new to the topic and you're just starting to question vaccines, you're going to drop your jaw in a lot of different places. Unfortunately, for you guys that are Canadians, it's a lot of American politics that are in there. But I think since you guys are going to become our 51st state,
yeah,
you're learning it now.
Well, it's a good way to know it.
And like that. So if you've gotten the book, thank you so much. If you've read it, please put a review on Amazon. And I hope that you will get it. Most of the people read it, said it reads kind of like a suspense thriller. It's not just a dry bunch of facts. And you can use that QR code, or you can go to drtenpenny.com/0. You can get it there, or you can get it from Amazon as print, ebook, or Audible, and you can get it on Barnes and Nobles.
It's a fabulous book. I can't believe how much of your book that I've underlined or highlighted.
A funny story about that, Ted, is when I started rereading the book, because I was going to be doing a lot of interviews about it. I wrote it, right? And I'm going through it, dog-earing things and underlining and highlighting things, laughing at myself, sitting here at my desk, laughing at it. It's like, stop it. You wrote that. So, there's good stuff in there. And these are all of our podcasts and different places where you can follow us. And on November the 13th, I'm starting a whole new venture on with America Out Loud on iHeartRadio, and also on it will all of my podcasts will go on iHeartRadio, and the next day will go up on 12 different podcast platforms.
Fabulous.
So we're going to go out and get things going out in a much bigger way. So, I see there's 61 comments. So I guess people in the chat. So I guess people really were saying things about.
Yeah, people are listening and making comments. We're kind of following along. So if there's any comments, we'd let you know what stands out. But that was a fantastic presentation, Dr. Tenpenny. I tell you, I learned a lot, and I tell you, I'm not going to rush out and get a pertussis shot. That's for sure.
Well, good. Well, I hope that this was I intended to make this
If you find value in the kind of conversations we have here at Vaccine Choice Canada, I invite you to support our work by becoming a member.
This when I set out to do this presentation, to make it thorough. So it covers the history, the transition from whole cell to acellular, what happens in babies, what happens in teens, and what happens in adults, and this whole nonsense about cocooning and stuff like that. And Ted, I totally agree with you that it's until you start digging through all of this research and studies. I mean, you kind of know it's bad, but you have no idea how bad it is. Like how they decided to start giving pertussis vaccines to pregnant women. It was like, we'll just give it to them.
There doesn't seem to be even one good sort of conclusion that's been made, but despite all the research and so forth, that seems to be accurate or beneficial for the people receiving the shots. Everything seems to be saying, don't take it, don't take it.
And this is just the pertussis vaccine. And I've got a lot of other courses that are available. If you go to learning for you, learning the number 4 YOU.org. There's a lot of other courses about other vaccines that are available there. There's a ROGAM course. There's one that's I think is really good. I think one of our best and most popular courses is how to read a package insert. So and we're always telling parents to read the package insert, but if you don't have a medical background, or you don't come from being a nurse or a PA or a doctor, package inserts can be rather intimidating. So this goes through every section on a package insert. And I think I use Adacel. I think I use a pertussis vaccine as just an example, because they're all standardized. So it shows people how to read a package insert, which sections are important. I think that's probably one of our most popular courses. And there's also a vitamin K course. There's a ROGAM course. There's a course about tetanus. If you want to get a whole bunch of information about tetanus, there's just a lot of courses there. And interestingly enough, at the beginning of 2020, my goal for the year of 2020 was to complete the whole series, to do a course on every one of the vaccines. And then, of course, COVID happened, and I did a whole bunch of courses. There's a whole bunch of courses in there about COVID and about the myth of the mask, the fraud of the PCR testing. Those are all available in there too, in case they try to pull this nonsense on us again. And so because of that, my life sort of went in a little different direction. So I didn't get around to making some of the courses I wanted to. There's a course in there about a combination chickenpox and shingles. There's a shingles vet course that I just did not too long ago. There's
Wow.
And so because I get a lot of questions about that vaccine, and you can't talk about the shingles vaccine without talking about chickenpox. So I did the combination of those two together. So there's a lot of information in there that you can get.
Wow, that's fantastic. All in one place.
50,000 hours worth of information, huh?
Something like that. Yeah. And I still am doing it. I'm still, with doing a lot of research and a lot of writing, with this book that just came out, it's Zero Accountability in a Flailed System is the name of the book. And so took about 1.5 years to write, but it's really a compilation of 25 years of work of what I've been doing. And there's things that I weave in and out of there. Like in 2005, when the bird flu vaccine, this whole got started. I got started writing this book because in the summer of 2023, bird flu stuff was starting to kick up again. And I had written a book on bird flu in 2005. And somebody on my staff, it's not in print right now, got a copy of that book, and they said, "This is really good. Let's just change the cover and you can re-release this." And I said, "No, it was written 20 years ago. Lots of things have changed. There was a lot of, President Bush politics, 2005 politics and stuff in there. So I just can't do that." And they said, "Well, then you need to rewrite it." I said, "Well, you understand that when you write a book, it takes over your life for a while, because I've written several long books, 4 long books, and a bunch of ebooks, shorter ones." I said, "It takes over your life. Well, you got to do this." Okay. So for a year and a half, that's pretty much all I did. I did a lot of research. The book has, it's a 400-page book, but the last 63 pages of the book is the index. So as you're reading the book, if you later want to look something up, you'll probably find it easily in the index. And there are over 250 references, and all the references are in the back too. So it's a lot of work.
Yeah, you sure did.
And thank you for buying it, Ted. Thank you.
Well, I think you sent me signed copies, what you did. So thank you
Oh,
very
my.
much. Or maybe Michelle did.
That'll be worth quite a bit one of these days, I think.
I don't know about that.
Sherri, do you feel that there's a bit of a sea change happening in the last 6 months or so?
I do. And actually, I did a presentation in New Jersey a couple of weeks ago about this, about the fact that, we've been, all of us, that are probably on this call, and I know you, Ted, and you, Steve, have been pounding on the wall for decades, for a long time. And I've kind of the concept of death by 1,000 cuts, that we just, all of us, there's, we're still a pretty small group relatively. I mean, the United States is 300 million adults. And I'll be generous to say there's 1 million of us that really have been fighting against this for 20 years. That's really generous. It's probably more like 100,000 or less. But people in their small groups and churches and just maybe they just decided not to vaccinate, but they just didn't say anything about it. They just didn't do it. So there's only a handful of us that are really on the front line and really outspoken. There's probably thousands and thousands more that listen to what you said, Ted, or what I said, or Ingrid Cassell, or Barbara Lowe Fisher, or all these people over the years, and said, "You're right, I'm not doing that." Just, they didn't make a big deal of it. And so we don't really know to count them.
Yeah.
But anyways, we've all been in our own way trying to sow seeds and tell and warn people, and show people presentations like this, show them about the ingredients, show them about the faulty science and the lack of anything to prove that you should do any of this stuff. And we've been just pounding on that wall. And now I think for the first time, we're starting to see significant cracks in that wall. I never in my lifetime thought I would hear a president of the United States go, "The autism is a real problem. We really need to be looking at this." And to hear him say, and to hear, like Bobby Kennedy say, well, and Bobby's been on our team for a really long time. So, unfortunately, Trump is running cover for him, and he's kind of letting him do a lot of the stuff. He's made 6 significant changes in that schedule already, and it's only been 8 months. There have been no changes in that vaccine schedule other than piling on more vaccines in the last 30 years. And now they've taken mercury out. They're questioning the RSV vaccine. They're questioning things about the COVID shot, and so I just feel like with Bobby's up there, and I've said this a lot, and I've said it on podcasts where I said, he's swimming in a pond of really hungry, angry, nasty alligators.
Yeah.
And the only thing he has is like a stick to beat him off with, and he has to be strategic about where he hits them. He has to be strategic about where his next foot lands, so he doesn't land on a landmine or his leg doesn't get bitten off. Because he's not only has all of these rabid people in Congress and in the Senate who are fed by the pharmaceutical industry money for decades. Not only is he up against our own government and the NIH and the FDA, he's against 200 million people in the United States who still believe in safe and effective. And still want to trust their doctor, and still like, what do you mean I can't get my flu shot? And so he's got it on both sides. So I think that the best we can do is, yes, those of us are frustrated because he's not moving fast enough, because we've been doing this for 30 years. We want him to do it in 3 minutes. And that's just not how politics works. And I'm grateful that he's still there and that he's making headway and that he's actually making little steps. And early on, Bobby had sent me a text. We were texting about something. And he said, just remember the Titanic can't turn on a dime. And that sort of sums it up, how long has this been going on? For decades, with the most moneyed, most evil, most nonsensical science that ever. And we still got all these doctors who are like safe and effective. And what do you mean my pregnant woman can't get a COVID shot? And the American Academy of Pediatrics and the West Coast people want to set up their own schedule to defy the federal government. I'm wondering if they do that, if that means if they set up their own schedule out there in, Washington, Oregon, and California, and they say, we're going to set up our own schedule according to the American Academy of Pediatrics, we are defying what the CDC and the federal government says are the rules. I'm wondering if that means they get cut off from all their federal funding too.
I think Medicaid, Medicare, those are the issues if they don't align themselves with the CDC recommendations.
No, it wouldn't be Medicare and Medicaid. It would be the Vaccine for Children's Fund, and it would be the Section 307 funding for vaccines, because that's where all the states get all their money from the federal government to run their programs. It's the section. It's Section 315, I think is the name of it.
Is a certain name for the program though, where the children get free vaccines if they're not if they meet certain criteria of not being financially well enough to pay for them.
But that is funded by the Vaccine for Children Fund.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
And it's also funded by Section 317, Section 317 funding that goes into those low income places of the public health department where these kids get their vaccines, and also where that pays for the vaccines to go into pediatricians' offices. So if they defy the federal government, can the federal government say, that's okay, go set up your own thing, you're not getting any army?
Well, would they still be covered by the 1986 Act?
That's a really good question. We don't really know about that.
Because maybe that's the way to take down the act. Say, go ahead, you do what you want, but you're no longer have liability protection.
Well, the liability, yeah, that could very well be. I think there was a big hullabaloo about that a couple months ago, and then it's kind of died down. And I wonder if there's some, smart lawyers who have said, wait a minute, we need to rethink this, about the Section 317 funding, about the Vaccines for Children funding that goes to the low income children. What about liability protection? Wait, slow down here a little bit. Slow down. You can spout off and get as mad as you want, but wait a minute, So
sounds like there's some holes in the Titanic, huh? There
are, and that's that presentation that I did in New Jersey. I showed a picture of a castle being blown apart by cannonballs. That we're finally at that place that I think that my only real concern about it is that who comes into office after Trump.
Right.
Is he going to continue to support the progress that we've made at the NIH and the FDA and at HHS and all these different things and all these? Are they just going to come in by executive order and just erase everything?
Well, and I think that's the concern that Bobby has, is that the culture has to shift, and people have to wake up and understand that there are no safe vaccines, and then there's no longer a demand for them. But we've got a ways to go. But there's no foundation to this program.
It's the physicians that drive me crazy. That they, like I said, I wanted to have those tombstones: death of literacy, death of common sense, and then put a doctor on there, with a white coat, and just it's just like the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Medical Association, the Association of Gynecology and Obstetrics, all these people writing all these things saying you can't question vaccines, you can't take these away. It's like, when did you stop reading? When did you stop being able to assess what is actually happening here?
Yeah. Well, there much needs to be shown to the general public, the deceit and so forth, before they will go like, maybe I should start questioning all vaccines. I think the COVID thing, of course, triggered it. A lot of people going like, whoa, no, wait a minute. That's, if they lied to us about that, could they have lied to us about the other one? So it's a bit like they need to, the general public has to catch on. You can't order them not to take something. In fact, you probably tell them you can't have those, they'll want them more. So they have to make their own decision.
Well, that's one of the things that I call one of the several things I call the gift of COVID. Is one of the gifts of COVID was, the world woke up and saw how really corrupt the government is. They really saw how dismal our healthcare system is. It's not even a healthcare system; it's a murder system. And they, people didn't die from COVID even in the hospital. They died of medical malpractice. And then they also learned a lot about the COVID shot, and they started saying, wow, if they lied to us about that, did they lie to us about these other shots? And during COVID, people got pregnant. They didn't have anything else to do. They were locked in the house, so they might as well have sex, right? So they had babies. They didn't go to the doctor because the pediatrician either wouldn't see them, or they were locked into their house, or they'd lost their healthcare insurance or something like that. So they didn't go to the pediatrician to get their program, get put in that program. And they're now 3-4 years old. They're having a second baby, and the first one was completely unvaccinated, and like they didn't die. Look at that. And they don't have asthma and eczema, and they don't have they're not cranky. They don't have ear infections all the time. Look, they're healthy, and they didn't have a single vaccine. Maybe we should look into this vaccine stuff a little bit closer, and maybe not vaccinate the next one either. And so those are all,
fingers crossed.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, let's hope.
Those are all secondary effects of COVID that I think were gifts of COVID, unintended gifts.
Can we take care of these hands and then we'll bring it to a close? I think
Yes.
Michelle's got something she wants to say.
I don't know how to.
I
don't. All I see is the three of us.
There we go.
Okay.
Hi, Dr. T. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Michelle.
Really good presentation as always. Thank you. That was amazing. I just wanted to, for those who are not checking inside the chat, I know some people are already doing that. I've created an affiliate link for Vaccine Choice Canada for inside of Dr. Tenpenny's courses. So anybody here who wants to pick up one of those courses or a bundle, you can use the letters VCC, like Vaccine Choice Canada, VCC at checkout, and you can get 10% off. And I've just sent a message to my team. It's 10 o'clock over here, so most of them are just closing up for the day. But I've asked them to add some more things to that too. So just keep checking over the next couple of days. We're adding more things there for you, but all the courses Dr. T mentioned are inside of your special link. And I'm going to post it one more time for everybody here to see. And you can take that link, Ted and Liz and Stephen there, just share that with your email lists or social media. We can create some short links for you too. And that's it. Just want to let you guys know so nobody missed that opportunity to get that 10% discount.
That's great, Michelle. And also, there are quite a few people on the call here from Canada Health Alliance too. So it's kind of a joint Zoom call. But so I suppose they can just go ahead and use the VCC code as well. Would that be correct?
Yep. They don't need their own. For anybody who's listening and anybody who sends it out, their friends and family, you can all use that code.
Great. Well, we've got a newsletter going up this week, so we'll add that to our newsletter. That'd
Awesome.
be great.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
We've got a phone number here, 705. Have you got a question for Dr. Tenpenny?
Hey, thanks for that great presentation, Dr. Sherri Tenpenny. Really answers a lot of questions I had about vaccines. But I just have one more. What are your thoughts on vaccinating pets, like dogs and stuff?
It's equally as awful.
Mm-hmm.
It's equally as bad because most of particularly cats, they have documented evidence of where they got feline sarcoma in the exact same spot where they had their vaccines. And dogs are dying left and right because of hyper vaccinating. And I did a whole presentation a while ago about vaccines and inside of cows and pigs and sheep and stuff like that, because everybody was up in arms about the mRNA vaccine being added to our food supply. And because there is one vaccine that it's called Synquicity, I believe, that they are already using in pork and pigs, at least here in the US. And so there was a big roar about that. So my question was, how many vaccines do these animals already get? How many do they get that just have been part of their poisoning program? It was shocking. Hundreds of vaccines that are available for cattle and sheep and chickens, more for chickens than anything. And it's horrible. And I gave that presentation at I think it was the year before last, at a conference I spoke at up in Minnesota, and everybody was so freaked out about it and so grossed out about it. I haven't given it since. And it was a lot of work together.
Okay. What about like rabies and deworming and all that? Like,
deworming is a whole different thing. I mean, they should be treated orally. There's an oral, they can use ivermectin, they can use fenbendazole. I give my dog fenbendazole, 150 milligram tablets once a month. I just cramp down his throat. And that treats their little parasites in their body. That's just fine. The rabies vaccine, it kind of depends on where you live. But if you can get away with not giving it, don't give it, because it is the most filthy, dirty, awful vaccine. You know all that stuff I showed you about the pertussis vaccines? You ain't seen nothing till you looked at a package insert from this vaccine. What's being injected in. And almost every animal I know that got a rabies vaccine or rabies booster either died or became angry and aggressive, and they had to put them down.
Really?
Yeah, really.
Okay. Yeah, because I wasn't sure.
If you really want to know about that, Michelle, I don't know if you're still on here. If you have a Dr. Faulkner's website, there's a homeopathic doctor that we do a lot of consults with. And on his website, he has a free course about rabies in animals.
Great.
So you can go out to there. And he also has lists all over America and all over Canada of doctors that do homeopathic veterinarian consults by phone. And so you can look at those lists of people and get a consult about your dog or cat or rabbit or hamster, by phone. So I don't know if Michelle, there, she put it in. I see she put it in the chat.
Great.
Oh yeah, it's called Vital Animal, VITAL animal.com. That's Dr. Faulkner. He's a great guy.
Thanks for that. We got one more question, Roxana.
A pleasure, Dr. Tenpenny. Actually, my dog, one of my wake-up calls was my mini Dachshund, Mitzi. She died from the rabies shot back in 1993. So that was one of the things that woke me up. Regarding the pertussis injections, do we know how long people stay as asymptomatic carriers? Supposing you're sitting beside someone in a theater, a stranger, you don't know, a older person who's had an injection. Do we have any idea how long we could be vulnerable?
Well, if you've had an injection, you're not going to be shedding on people from that. That baboon study was about if you had the injection and got exposed to pertussis, you became a colonizer.
Wow.
That's what you're kind of asking. But if you've got a healthy immune system, a vitamin D level up where it needs to be, and you're taking vitamin C, you shouldn't have to worry about it. And remember, death from pertussis is negligible, and it's even less in adults. So, wash your hands, get your vitamin D level up between 80 and 100, and take vitamin C ascorbates. We've got bunch of products on our website, like that. Optimune is one that we really recommend, is a really, really good. And I do believe that our store ships to Canada now. And so Optimune has quercetin and NAC and vitamin C and a couple other things in it that really does boost up your immune system.
And I do all those things. I don't have a personal fear so much as a curiosity regarding potential exposure. Regarding all these poor moms who are getting injected to the hilt, I have to wonder, and I missed a lot of the talk, unfortunately, how much of so-called postpartum depression is really just the poisons from the vaccines?
Well, maybe, but postpartum depression is really related more, at least in my experience, to the big drop in progesterone that happens in their bodies. Because your placenta is a progesterone manufacturing machine. I mean, your levels of progesterone when you're pregnant versus non-pregnant, I mean, are like like I'm just going to make up a number. Like when you're non-pregnant, I'm going to say it's around 30 micrograms per liter, and when you're pregnant, it's like 1,500. It's really, really high because progesterone made by a placenta glues the baby in. And so estrogen helps you to get pregnant, and then progesterone from the placenta glues the baby in. So after the baby's born and you have this big loss of the placenta, you get this big and sudden drop in progesterone. And it's been my experience that people that have postpartum depression, it's because of the big loss of progesterone. And if you put them back on some topical, natural, compounded progesterone cream for the first couple of weeks and gradually take that away, it doesn't do anything to the baby, doesn't hurt the baby, because the baby's been swimming in progesterone from the time it was conceived. And just gradually take it down over the next 2 weeks, you can almost eliminate postpartum depression with that.
And homeopathy is something else to consider too, because why do certain women get it and others don't suggests there's an individual or characteristic to it, that which may be able to address if you have something which is individually prescribed based on their symptom pattern. So homeopathy is something to add to what Dr. Tenpenny said.
Yeah, that's really true. And so, it's but to what you said, the person who asked the question, yes, from getting all these vaccines, they need to get detox from that stuff too. I just don't think that's probably postpartum depression, but it could relate to other types of conditions that they may get from those shots.
I think that anyone who's poisoned actually is going to be less able to kind of maintain their homeostasis. So when they see that kind of a drop in their progesterone levels, if they're already kind of, only working at 70%, let's say, and let's face it, they've gone through delivery, carrying the baby and then having delivery, that their system is challenged, and with a predisposition to depression, for example, it may just cause them to slip into that state.
Yep.
And have you worked with post-transplant patients? Because I'm dealing with a friend who takes all the vaccines faithfully. Now she's just had open heart surgery. It drives me crazy. I can't get through to her. Have you been able to get any transplant patients basically to use like homeopathic or other things instead of doing the vaccine route? Well,
that's really, really tough because usually I know every transplant hospital that I've talked to and I'm aware of here in the States, I know of about 6 of them. I live in Cleveland, Ohio, and I know that all of them around here in Pittsburgh and Indianapolis, Detroit, and places like that, they require the person to be fully vaccinated before they get the organ transplant. And they were even requiring COVID shots. This is amazing. Yeah. They wanted people to have a COVID shot, which would probably kill them before they got an organ transplant. Go figure. And so after the fact, and they want that to be done before you get the transplant, because most of the drugs that are used post-transplant suppress your immune system, and they want you to be protected by those vaccines before you have the transplant and go on those transplant drugs.
Thank God for vaccines. She had her transplant over 30 years ago, and I'm shocked, quite frankly, she's still going, but it's taken its toll, I think
I'm sure.
I also just want to mention quickly that Raising Nature's Child has officially launched, and our first course is now available, Raising Healthy, Happy Eaters. So for anyone that who is not vaccinating their children, but may not be picking up where they need to when it comes to healthy eating, it's a fantastic course that will help them to get on track so that their children can be healthy and happy. Thanks so much.
That's a really, really good point. Is that if you decide not to vaccinate your kids, you're not being irresponsible. You're actually choosing a life that requires more responsibility. that you have to make sure that they are eating right, sleeping right. They're not eating a lot of sugar and junk food, that they take adequate vitamins for their age, even if it's just a very good quality multivitamin, because our foods are so depleted now, you really do need a little bit of a supplement there. Washing your hands, getting to bed on time. I mean, you've chosen a lifestyle to keep your children healthy that require more parenting and more responsibility. So that's really pretty cool. I'm really glad to see that. Thanks for starting that.
Dr. Tenpenny, this has been a fabulous presentation. We got more than we were counting on, so thank you very much. That was a very thorough review of pertussis, and as much as I thought I knew, you've covered some new things. So thank you.
Oh, good. Well, that's always important. Thank you for that feedback, because it's always, especially when you're yapping along for 78 slides, it's good to know that I brought some information to you that you may not have known before.
And I really appreciate that PowerPoint, so we can share it with our online audience. There's important information there for everybody. So
yeah, I'll get with Michelle so that she's got your email and she can send it out to you.
Thank you. And thank you for 25 years of good work that you've been doing in this vaccine risk awareness movement. And I do think we're making a difference. I'm hearing more and more people saying, I will never take another vaccine again. So there's a shift happening.
Even doctors are saying that. I mean, that they would stop recommending vaccination. If they could do it again for their own kids, they would not vaccinate them.
Yeah.
Seriously, where are you hearing those physicians say that?
Well,
Steve?
Pierre Corey actually said that. He came out and said that. I see other people. He said yes, he would not vaccinate his children if he had a second chance.
Well, those are people already in our camp. I'm more questioning.
No, he actually was not in our camp until
he is now, though. But he is now.
With regard to vaccinations, with regard to treating COVID and all that sort of thing, COVID vaccinations, I think he was in our camp there. But he had a second look, and I think you've got to give people credit who really kind of say, "Hey, I made a mistake." Very difficult for doctors to do.
That's a very true statement.
Yeah.
It's a very true statement. Well, thank you so much, Ted. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Good to see you again.
Right.
If you find value in these conversations, I invite you to support Vaccine Choice Canada with a donation. Your support allows us to do even more, to educate families and to protect our right to medical choice for ourselves and for our children. To make a donation, go to vaccinechoicecanada.com.